Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. My name is Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
And this week, we take a step away from our spooky games that we were going through last October for Halloween, and we continue our conversation about id Software. Now, the book that we're using here is called Masters of Doom by, Kushner? Oh, I'm not Jared Kushner, not
David
Tony
Kushner.
David Kushner, that's what it is. I'm like, how many different Kushners do I have in my life? David Kushner, Masters of Doom. We're on chapters 14 and 15, I believe. So, Mike, you want to take it away? Tell us a little bit about chapter 14.
Yeah, let's get into it. So, chapter 14 actually starts with something that I knew nothing about until I read this book. You know, like a lot of things in this book. I didn't know that essentially in the mid-90s, Texas, Dallas specifically, but also Austin, was kind of known as like a hotbed for video game development. Did you know this?
Yeah, like kind of. I mean, yeah, I guess. Yeah, I've never made the connection of like, yes, Texas was the place. But now that you mention it, like there was a lot of stuff going on in Texas, especially in the early mid-90s.
Yeah, so like it is in Dallas, well, specifically Mesquite, Texas, which is right outside of Dallas. Richard Garriott, Ultima fame, his company Origin is in Austin. You had Apogee in Dallas, and they made Duke Nukem. You had 3D Realms was in Texas, and they had Rogue and Ritual were spin-offs from both id and 3D Realms. Rogue was from id, Ritual was from 3D Realms. Ensemble Studios, that was made up of former id Software employee Sandy Peterson. Remember Sandy Peterson?
Oh, yeah.
They would make Age of Empires. That's a very big game that we should do a history on at some point. Terminal Reality would go on to make Flight Simulator. They were in Texas. And then, you have all these... Oh, and Terminal Reality also was made up of ex-Apogee members. So it's like people that had come to Texas to work for Apogee or id or Origin, and then they split off and formed more companies.
Yeah.
And this just kind of caused this big boom in Texas game development. And they had nicknames. They called them Doom Babies was one of the nicknames. The New Cowboys, the New Hollywood. But the book uses the term that I think is the best term, and it's called Silicon Alamo. So... it's fun to think also about how like these developers are influencing the towns they were in too. For example, John Carmack and id donated bulletproof vests to the Mesquite Police Department. So when John Carmack wanted to use the airport as a drag racing strip and asked the mayor if they could shut down the airport for a day, they were like, yeah, sure, why not? You know, most of these games, though, I should say, were first-person shooters. And most of them were licensing the Quake engine to some degree. And id was just rolling in the dough at this point. So some of these companies paid as much as $250,000 plus royalties to license the engine from id.
Nice.
And this also made the media frenzy for a, quote, Quake killer. Like a game that would finally take id down from their top spot as the ultimate PC first-person shooter studio, okay? And there were some real contenders here. I mean, you got Half-Life by Valve, you got Unreal by Epic, and of course, John Romero's company, Ion Storm, was making Daikatana. And all of these had to go up against Quake II at E3 in 1997. And honestly, Carmack wasn't too worried at this point. The book even says that Carmack knew he didn't work well if he thought competitively, like if he thought he was going up against these other games. And so while the rest of the staff was like ridiculing all the projects that came in, like the book used an example that when they were playing the demo for Half-Life, they're like, this game is trash. You know, it's never going to sell. It's going to fail. Carmack never did anything like that. In fact, his whole mindset at id has changed. And in short, the fun was gone is how I will describe it. That same competitive attitude that John Romero, while he was at id, had towards other competitors. For example, how they hated Myst so much when they were making Doom, which is still very funny to me. That has kind of turned towards like internally at id. So now developers at id were competing with each other. And the book describes it as militaristic, which can't be fun. Like, I've never heard anything described as militaristic, and people thought it was enjoyable. Have you?
No,
I can't think of anything. Yeah, right. It's pretty bad. So the reason for this inside competition, though, was actually a terrible bonus structure at id. This is pretty nuts. So every quarter, the owners of id, so that's John Carmack, Adrian Carmack, that gang, They would meet up and they would assign actual dollar values to their employees. And that's how they would determine who got how much of like the bonus pool.
Oof.
Yeah, so you could be on the same team as someone and they would make $100,000 in their bonus, but you would only get $20,000.
Dang. Both of those sound like great numbers.
I mean, yeah, I would take $20,000 in a heartbeat right now. But
when somebody else is getting $100,000 for doing what is probably the same thing as you, that feels pretty bad.
And not only are they doing the same thing as you, the owners even know this is a bad system, and they're actively saying, like, you're not doing as good a job as him, so you're getting less money.
Oof.
You know, yeah, which just seems like it's really, like, yikes. Because, you know, you hear about it in, like, offices or, like, you know, sales or whatever, where it's like competition makes the company better and stronger because people want to win. And I get that to a certain extent, but this just feels real bad.
Yeah, I think it probably works better with smaller teams where everybody works that way, where they are motivated in that way. Because there are some people who are very motivated in that way, and that's a really good way to get them to work really hard. As you grow in size as a company, I think you'll start to get more people who do not operate that way, and the system really starts to fall apart when you have people that don't operate that way. Like personally, that's not how I operate. That's why I can't work in sales. Like I that would be burnout city for me. Like I could never do it.
Me also. Although Tyler and I do get very competitive with each other during this podcast. If you can't tell.
Yes.
Just always.
Yep.
So, okay, continue on. American McGee, remember him? Best name in video games at the time. Working as a level designer at id. He used to be a friend of Carmack when like John Romero was split. Like, we believe he was a really good friend of Carmack. Now at this point, he has kind of fallen out of favor with Carmack, but then again, Carmack has kind of fallen out of favor with anyone. Like Tim Willits was also like trying to move in and be buddy with Carmack, but the truth was John Carmack, our beloved John Carmack, as always, just wanted to disappear, be alone, and code his games. And even though he thought the size of the company and the project teams were just too big, like, because he knew that the more people involved, the more time it took to communicate and get stuff done, like, it just ruined everything. So he had been actively, like, streamlining the company and trying to make it smaller and smaller and smaller. And this actually worked because they delivered when Quake II launched on December 9th, 1997. It was a resounding success. And one of Quake II's biggest fans was John Romero, of all people. He was like, in the book, he's like praising id in the media. Like, this is the most amazing game. I think in the book it also says, I didn't write this down, but I'm pretty sure he beat Quake II in like 48 hours. Like, he played it straight for 2 days. Yeah. And Romero was such a big fan, not only because he liked the game, but he also was licensing the Quake II engine so he could get those sweet, sweet new lighting effects for his game, Daikatana. But there was trouble brewing at Iontarm, and it actually all started at E3 1997. When I talked about how Daikatana was going up with Half-Life and Quake II and Unreal at the time, well, the Daikatana demo was less than spectacular. In fact, almost all the employees at Iontarm thought it was bad. Like, not great. No. Yeah, but Romero, according to them, was more interested in playing games at E3 and talking to press and developers and schmoozing than actually giving his own team instructions on what to do with the game. And this was kind of the beginning of the bad times at Iontarm. Most of the team actually didn't even like the idea of waiting for the Quake II engine. They were just like, hey, like, you're not going to compete with John Carmack. Just get the game out now. And also, not to mention the fact that Romero was waiting on the Quake II engine, and he still wanted Daikatana to be 4 times the size of the original Quake. He wanted it to have 64 monsters. He wanted it to have this, like, time zone thing in it, where there's, like, 4 different time zones running in the game. I was kind of confused about this. And also, he wanted all that done by March 1998. And this is E3 1997, less than a year. Eidos, their publisher, was also not stoked that Daikatana would miss the 1997 holiday season, because that is a big deal if you're trying to sell games. Christmas, holidays, sells games. We all know that.
November. That's when all the big games come out.
Yeah, that's right. So Romero assured them, though, like, hey, we can get this done. I just need more employees. Okay, I just need more manpower. That's all he wanted. So that original $13 million budget, which was meant for 3 games from Iontarm.
They had a deal with
now
Eidos, right?
Yeah, with Eidos. They had a deal that they had $13 million to produce 3 games that would be published by Eidos. And that $13 million budget was dwindling, to say the least. And it was a lot because they had such a big team. They had 80 employees at Iontarm. Each employee had 2 computers. Okay. Each one had 21-inch monitors at the time. Like office renovations too, because he wanted to be like the dream office where like all the vending machines and stuff. Like the office alone had a $2 million chunk out of that $16 million budget.
Dang.
Yeah. Mike Wilson, though, Ion's marketing guy, he had a plan. Okay, so Ion Strike was an idea, like was supposed to be a part of Ion Storm, and Ion Strike was going to be the self-publishing wing of Ion Storm. And this was kind of what they had planned to do when they were done working with Eidos. And in the contract with Eidos, Mike makes sure that they actually had 6 games if they wanted. So they got 3 games with a budget of it was $16 million, right? Then the next 3 games that Ion Storm wanted to make, they had to take and pitch them to Eidos, and then Eidos could fund those 3 if they wanted. They had like first pick, essentially.
Okay.
If they wanted to see if they did that. And Mike's plan was to now go to Eidos with 3 more games to get even more funding. But the plan had different parts to it. So I'll kind of explain what's going on here. How they really, like, the funding would have been great, but they really didn't care. And here's why. The first part of the plan was they wanted to get an easy game, like an easy win. Like, here's a game that we can just put out as one of our 3 with Eidos in the initial batch of 3 and just get it done. So they got Todd Porter to work for them at Ion Storm. He used to work at a company called 7th Level. That was his company. He co-founded it with 3 other people. He left. But 7th Level still owned his old game called Dominion. Now, Dominion was 6 weeks away from launch when he left.
Dang.
So, I think it was for $1.6 million, Ion Storm decided to purchase Dominion because Todd insisted. He's like, hey, this game's almost done. I can finish it in 6 weeks, and boom, we got a game out. So they bought it immediately. And he started working on that. And the idea was he'd finish Dominion, and then he would work on his other game, Doppelganger, which was the original one he was going to work on while at Ion Storm. So that was going on. Second part of the plan. Then, in 1997, Warren Spector, who was a game veteran and was looking for a place to go. And Warren was known for like more intellectual games, like immersive simulations. He actually made Thief, he made Underworld, and he made System Shock, which are 3 big games. And he started working at the new Ion Austin, which is Ion Storm's Austin base of operations, and on his dream game, a sci-fi counter-terrorist game called Deus Ex.
Ooh, that'd be a good one to do a history on at some point.
That'd be a really good one to do. So, fun fact about Warren Spector, by the way, this is super fun. He hated all of Ion Storm. Like, essentially, he hated that John Romero used things like Suck It Down, like all those ad campaigns. Mm-hmm. He hated everything we can't say on this podcast that John Romero would do. And Spector wanted to be, quote, the classy part of this company, was what it was used in the book. So, yeah, Warren Spector is working at Ion Austin on Deus Ex, but he's a part of Ion Storm, but he's out on the side doing his own thing. And so those were the first 2 pieces to get 2 quick games for Eidos Interactive. Mike Wilson then decided to essentially throw the meeting with Eidos. He went to England and met with them because that's where Eidos... Is it Eidos or Eidos? It might be Eidos.
I think it's Eidos.
Is it Eidos?
I think so, but maybe it's probably a lot of different ways to say it.
But you got 3 pronunciations. Take your pick, people. This is fun. So choose your own adventure. So the Eidos folks, he actually said he went to England to meet with Eidos, and he essentially was just like, hey, take these games or leave them. And he pitched them 3 games. Did not care. Kind of rude about it, from what it sounds like. And the folks at Eidos were like, no, like, who do you think you are coming in here? We don't want any of these games. And like, I imagine Mike Wilson left the meeting with like a small like fist pump, like, yeah, I did it. Because what this means is once those 3 games came out, Deus Ex, Dominion, and Daikatana, they were free from Eidos and they could start self-publishing, which is what they wanted, which is what Mike Wilson wanted to do. That's very important. Right after this Eidos meeting thing, the take it or leave it, that's when the infighting at Iontarm got really, really bad. So Todd Porter did not like Mike Wilson. Todd Porter being the person who is making Dominion, Mike Wilson being the marketing person who just essentially blew off Eidos Interactive. Todd actually got a call from the CEO of Eidos threatening to strangle Mike Wilson.
Whoa.
Yeah. You can't threaten violence on somebody.
No, not okay.
Yeah, so that happened. And so Todd went to Tom Hall and John Romero, but they were all wrapped up in their own games and they couldn't do it. They just didn't care, didn't do anything. And while this was going on, Mike was going after Todd. So they were like subterfuge. There's some real Game of Thrones secession stuff going on here.
Dang.
Yeah, this whole episode should be called Office Drama. That's really what it should be.
It's like The Office, Game of Thrones, and Succession all in one.
Yeah, and a little bit of Silicon Valley thrown in there for good measure, I think. So, like, Mike was essentially friends with the scrappy young devs at Iontarm. You know, these are the devs that, like, never went to college, that love John Romero and just joined up because they're hackers, essentially. They come from that community and modders, and they love making games, and they're really good at what they do. Todd Porter's team were more like the PhD guys. Like, we went to college for this. We know a lot about computer science, da-da-da-da-da. And there was like kind of this culture clash going on. And it actually got so bad that Mike took John Romero and Tom Hall out to a bar and told them that everyone hated Todd Porter. He was just like, everyone hates Todd. Dominion at this point was also supposed to take 6 weeks, and it was taking way longer. This is
classic
way past
game development.
Yep, classic game development. So Mike convinced Romero and Tom Hall to fire Todd Porter. And they essentially in the book, it's like they got into the elevator to go up and tell him he's fired, when Romero was like backing down, like, hey, let's just give him another shot. Like, you can't fire someone because everyone hates you. We need to like lift him up and like help him out and support him. So Mike's plan backfired. You know whose plan didn't backfire? Todd Porter's plan did not backfire. So Mike was called into a meeting shortly after this, and it was Todd, John Romero, and Tom Hall. And they all said how they had received emails from the publisher Eidos saying they hated working with Mike Wilson. We do not want to work with you again. And this is a problem because now Mike Wilson is getting in the way of the money they need for funding. So also at this time, it was shown out that Mike Wilson borrowed company money to buy a new BMW.
Oops.
Which is not cool at all. No one likes that.
Dang.
Romero also finally put the nail in the coffin by saying Iontarm doesn't need to publish games. We need to make games. And if Mike wanted to be a publisher, he should just go. And with that, Mike Wilson was gone.
Goodbye, Mike Wilson.
Bye, Mike Wilson. We'll miss you. So Romero received the code to the Quake II engine in February 1998. After this point, after Mike Wilson was gone, and boy, oh boy, was he surprised. Now, we're going to cut from Romero receiving the code from Quake II, okay? And we're going to go back to John Carmack, okay? So we're jumping to John Carmack. So right as John Romero is opening what I imagine to be a giant box that's just full of code, right? That's how coding works, obviously. John Carmack is burned out. It's February 1998. John Carmack is burnt out at id. He had been actually like gotten bored of like coding, and he needed to take his mind off of something. And the way John Carmack takes his mind off of things is he learned how to count cards at blackjack as a hobby.
It seems like a John Carmack thing to do.
What's that?
That seems like a John Carmack thing to do, is learn how to count cards.
Oh yeah, it's a huge John Carmack thing to do. He actually made $20,000 on his first go of counting cards, which he then donated to the hacker ethic friendly organization called the Free Software Foundation, which is also a very John Carmack thing to do. He was then banned from playing blackjack in the casinos that knew him because they knew he was counting cards. Actually. So what he did after this is he went to a hotel in Florida, like he just flew to Florida, and he hid from the world for a week. And he actually like hid from the world not only to get away from like working on Quake II stuff, but also the infighting at id Software had gotten so bad that Tim Willits was he was the level designer at id. He made an Easter egg in Quake II where you go into a room and there's portraits of almost every single person on staff. And when you approach the portrait, something happens to the portrait that's meant to show the personality of the staff. And if you go up to John Carmack's portrait, it disappears into the floor. Like John Carmack is never there, essentially, was Tim Willits' message. So Carmack went to like escape his team kind of, and escape just the office life. And he was going to do research on his new Trinity engine. So while the rest of the team worked on a map pack for Quake II at the office, he would work on his next big game engine, Trinity. And in the plan file that you know how he writes those weekly plan files. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. Carmack actually went over how each game and engine he developed in his life was like a learning experience. Like he kind of went through his own personal history. It's actually in the book. It's very interesting to read. He also makes a lot of computer code references that I don't fully understand, which is fun. But he was actually quite optimistic going into the Trinity engine. Like, you know, like this is like going to be a learning experience for me. But what he didn't know is just how bad things had gotten at id while he was gone for that week. The level design team all hated each other. Like American McGee hated everyone on staff. Tim Willits hated everyone. They just didn't get along. The entire level design team, no one liked each other. Adrian and Kevin, the artists, were battling with Paul Steed. Like they didn't like him. So Carmack's solution for a way for him to use the Trinity engine and to make a new game was to build Quake III that would be deathmatch only, because he thought that this game would represent the company's animosity towards itself and it would work well. So Quake III would be deathmatch only. He would use some but not all of his ideas for the Trinity engine at the time. And also, since this was a deathmatch level design thing, none of the designers had to work with each other. They could be in complete isolation because they're just designing multiplayer levels alone that go in the game, versus when you're designing a story, you know, they have to be like cohesive and stuff like that.
Right. You have to work together to make sure they flow.
Yeah. So they don't have to work together at this point. Adrian, American, Paul, and Kevin all hated this idea. They did not want to do this. They wanted to do another game with a story. I know Adrian specifically was sick and tired of doing the Space Marine thing. He was just over it. But Carmack said in classic Carmack fashion, story is not important. And American McGee was actually fired shortly after this for, quote, not performing well. In kind of like those meetings where the owners bring everyone in, bring one person in, fire, like they did with John Romero. But then when American asked for more of elaboration, they just said, no one likes you.
Dang.
Yeah, this is like
Ruthless.
some real petty stuff going on. And actually, Paul Steed kind of made a point about that might be one of the most important things said in this entire book as to why this kind of all started falling apart. And it's here, I'm going to read the quote for you exactly. It's, quote, Romero is chaos and Carmack is order. Together, they made the ultimate mix. But when you take them away from each other, what's left? End quote. And that's pretty much what's going on here. Like, John Romero, you can tell just watching him, is like all about the chaos life, you know? And then Carmack is so obsessed with just coding, he ignores everything else. And you need to have both of them to make it work. And we can actually go back to Romero now. So February 1998, all of his office renovations were done. He had his vending machines, his TVs, his arcade machines, games. It's a dream office. But you know what he didn't have? Code that worked for his game.
Yikes.
That's right. Yeah, the Quake II engine was completely different than what Romero had imagined. And that was because John Carmack completely redesigned how he did things. It's not out of like malice or anything either, the book points out. He redesigned things because he found a way that made it work better. So it actually is like John Carmack being so innovative, it kind of screwed up all of John Romero's plans.
It was like all the work they had put into the first Quake engine for Daikatana, like they just couldn't move it over easily.
Yeah, they thought they could move it over just because it would be, the Quake II engine can't be that much different than the Quake I engine, when in reality it was completely different. So John Romero pretty much realized, like, hey, March 1998, that's not going to work at all for anyone. His own programmers actually tried to convince John Romero to just release the game with the original Quake engine and not try to compete with Carmack. He's like, don't compete with Carmack. You can't keep up with him, is what they said. They're like, you need to just release Daikatana to get it out into the world. And he refused because he wants his game to be perfect. It was all about design, remember?
Classic Romero.
Classic Romero. So they were having further money problems too. Dominion did not take 6 weeks to finish, but it did take longer, and it cost them $3 million. To make. And Eidos was now, I just changed it again. Eidos was now sending them money monthly to keep the lights on, which was also sad because the ceiling was made of glass in their penthouse office space, and there was too much light already. So the programmers actually ended up covering their cubicles with black felt. So if you walk into this dream office, you'd see like all this cool stuff, like vending machines and like TVs and arcade games. And then the cubicles would all be like individual little caves, is what they described them as. I thought it was pretty funny. So the situation at Iontarm was bad, to put it lightly. Daikatana was a constant crunch game. Like, how you get into crunch time on a game to finish the game, like you start crunch time like a month out and then the game's done. Well, they were doing those crazy hours with no end in sight. Like you were always working on the game and there was no end. At one point, a level designer spent so much time creating a series of levels only for them to realize they were unusable because they weren't communicating with each other. So he just wasted like all this time. One guy was found screaming in his cubicle for no reason, and Romero just fired him on the spot. This is bananas. Todd Porter and Jerry O'Flaherty both also started to show too much ownership of the company. Todd would be in Daikatana meetings for no reason, just adding suggestions that weren't helpful, even though his own game, Dominion, was just like not going anywhere. It just seemed like kind of a weird, there was like no structure at all. So there's some more weird office drama. Here we go. On May 13th, 1998, Sverre Vermo and Will Lecanto and 6 other employees took COO Bob Wright out to lunch. Seems nice, right?
Yeah.
But they essentially said, Todd and Jerry, leave the company or we leave the company. And Bob said to put it in writing if you're doing this. And then the other thing Bob said that was a little sketchy is that if these 8 employees got fired, he would help them get financing and help them start their own company.
Wow.
Yeah, there's some
That's
real
some
secession
next level
stuff going
treachery.
On. Treachery is a good way to put it. So Tom Hall actually heard about the meeting and tried to contact Romero, but this just happened to be the same week that he had another child with his wife, Beth. But when Romero did find out...
Romero had just had another child?
Yeah, at this time he had another kid. And when he heard from Tom Hall eventually, he fired Bob the next week. So Bob was gone. Kept the developers. Fired Bob. Because Bob was like, going to fund them essentially to start a new company. So it's a very cutthroat in Dallas at this time. So things are once again bad at E3, but this time in 1998. So we're a year later at E3. No one cared about Daikatana. Everyone was too hyped on Half-Life, Unreal, and now Quake III instead of Quake II. Dominion finally released, but flopped because of a little small indie RTS game called StarCraft. That just did everything better than Dominion and was released 2 months before Dominion.
Ooh, that feels bad to have your game be usurped by something that came out earlier than it. Oh,
yeah, it just was real rough. So this turned into the press as well. So websites all over the internet were tearing Romero and Iontarm apart. They had a lot of articles with names like "All Talk, No Game" and "Reasons Why I Won't Buy Daikatana." So if you thought like that silly internet like titles were new, they're certainly not. It's all there. There was also another fake Romero death story at this time. This guy gets more fake death stories than anyone I've ever seen. This time, a gaming magazine was quoted as saying sources at Iontarm confirmed Romero's death, even though no one said he was dead at Iontarm. They just made it up. And the photo that showed Romero lying on a morgue table with like a fake bullet wound in his head was actually for a Texas Monthly magazine article about Iontarm. But It leaked early and everyone thought Romero had actually died. Just so weird. You don't hear a lot of fake death stuff now in 2020.
Yeah.
You know? It's an interesting time.
Yeah.
All right. September 30th, 1998 was the biggest blow to Iontarm. This is when it was leaked that Eidos actually planned to buy Iontarm. And this is truly when things started falling apart. So no one knew who leaked the information. It was put out by an anonymous commentator named, I don't know if I can say this. Can I say this on the podcast?
Yeah, I think it's factual.
That's true. Bitch X is the name of the person that anonymously commented that Eidos was going to buy Iontarm. The deal would have been that Eidos would buy 19% of Iontarm's equity for $12.5 million in exchange for forgiving $15 million of that advance that happened. Ion's royalty on the games would also drop to 25%. They originally would get 40% royalties, but now they're getting 25% royalties. So that was the deal that was going on. And Romero found out there was a leak, so he tried to find the leak by tracing employee emails, and he never found it. Tensions at the company were running super high, and Romero actually got into a screaming match with Key Kimbrough, who, if you recall, made Dwango, that system that allowed you to play multiplayer Doom games before they actually made like a multiplayer function, like networking functionality.
Online, to play online. Yeah, it was like a matchmaking system.
Yeah, it was an online match. It used phone lines for online matchmaking systems for the original Doom. He got in a screaming match with Romero, and they actually fired Key and they fired Key. This is super ironic. They fired him for playing too many games and not working enough, which sounds very familiar to why a certain someone got fired from id Software. Shortly after that, employees started walking out after Key got fired. Everyone thought they were going to get a bonus, but when it showed that like Eidos was going to buy Iontarm, they knew that pretty much wouldn't happen. Like they thought they were going to get a bonus or they were going to get royalties, like as employees, and that's just not happening. But then because people started leaving, the Eidos deal fell apart and never actually happened. Todd Porter was made CEO because he felt that John Romero's non-confrontational style was just not working at all. And then Porter even hired an auditing firm to see if they could like stop hemorrhaging money, but they just couldn't figure it out. He ruled very loudly and angrily. And an example they use in the book is that there was a building on fire, like in the office one day, they could see a building on fire from their like penthouse window office. And the employees were watching the fires happen. And then Todd Porter came out to them and said, quote, "We're not paying you to watch a building burn." I'm like, that's another like weird, ironic thing. By the way, this is a side tangent because I worked for a spell at SAG-AFTRA in Los Angeles, and we were right next to the Warner Brothers lot, and there was like an intersection on the street where they would always have like no stop sign or light where there should have been a stop sign and a light, and there was like car accidents there probably once a month, and like we would always look out the window when it happened. Like work would stop for like an hour, okay? And I feel like as horrible as that is, you got to have that in an office job. You got to have, when weird stuff happens, you have to just embrace the fact that your workers aren't going to get work done because a weird thing has happened.
Yeah. I think that's totally normal.
Right? And I worked at a law firm in downtown Seattle, and like there was stuff like crazy things happening all the time. Like the Blue Angels would like buzz by the building I was in. I'm like, I'm not going to work, and no one else is. Everything's fine. So I just thought it was really weird that he's getting mad at employees for that. You know, it's rare you get to watch a building burn live. So
it's true.
All right. It's very true. On the evening of November 18th, 1998, that's right, we're in November of 1998, and Daikatana still has not come out. Romero was at a dinner at P.F. Chang's. He was invited by Stevie Case and a couple other loyal employees, and they were like, hey, the entire Daikatana team is walking out on you tomorrow. And Romero responded with F them if they're going to leave. He didn't say F them.
Yikes.
He said the full-blown word. We can't, even though that's history, I'm not going to say that.
Yeah.
We're a clean check mark on the iTunes podcast.
That's right.
And when I say iTunes, I mean Apple Podcasts. Okay. Sure enough, next morning in the conference room, the entire team was waiting for John Romero, and Will Lecanto said, quote, "We can't keep working under these conditions. We don't think this game is ever going to get done, so we're going to go and start our own company." End quote. And then Romero...
I gotta kind of agree with them a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, they were crunching, like crunch time games about to come out that you do like a month out for almost an entire year.
Yeah, which sadly is closer to the norm in the gaming industry nowadays.
Oh, that's so upsetting. Yeah. So the chapter ends with Romero sitting alone at his desk all day thinking about how he should have just never hired this many people. You know, like he should have just... He should have had to just be him, Tom Hall, and like a small people, and they had a goal to make a game, and it was going to be like what they wanted it to be, and it's good, and it's just this small team. And essentially, it's funny because at the end, the book ends with him dreaming of this small team with a common goal. And the first thought I had was essentially he wanted to go back to the lake house.
Yeah.
Like he wanted it to be the Commander Keen games day, or
there's just a few of them.
Yeah, where it's just him and Carmack and like 3 or 4 other people, and they're just making a game. And I think this is his moment of getting lost in the stardom of like being a big video game company.
Yeah. And it's sort of like just indicative of the times too, because in the early 90s, you could do that with a team of like 4 or 5, maybe even by yourself. You could make a game, a really good game that could be very, very commercially successful. And that's like, I mean, I don't want to say it could never happen today, but it's just really not the case today. Like if you want to make a good AAA title, that's not a single person production, right? That takes a whole team of tens, maybe hundreds of people nowadays. And it's just different. It was starting to change then, you know, like could he have made Daikatana by himself or with 2 or 3 other people? Probably not. And that's like, I guess that's just a bummer I'm sure for those guys who worked in the industry in those days when you could do it by yourself. And now, even in the later 90s, it's starting to become like no, this is a team effort, and then it just grows from there, you know?
Yeah, it makes me think about how crazy it is that Cuphead is like 4 people.
Yeah.
That made that game.
And that's a big game that blew. That's why I don't want to say it could never happen anymore, but it was like, that's a pretty lower budget indie title, right? That is very high quality, but you can tell that it's a much smaller game than what something like an Assassin's Creed game, right? That can never be a one-person operation.
Oh, yeah, there's no way. And you see indie people try to do something like that, and it just falls apart, which is unfortunate.
It's tough. And there are a lot of good indie games that are made by single people, and I'm not saying that you can't make a good game by yourself, but it is, if you're trying to make a game on that level of being like a AAA studio, it's pretty tough to do by yourself, if not impossible these days, so...
Definitely. Well, you going to tell us about Chapter 15? I'm excited.
Yeah, let's move into Chapter 15 a little bit. We might not make it through the whole chapter. We're really cruising here on time. So let's take a little bit of a break from all the infighting at both id Software and Iontarm and talk about a little bit more about some violence in video games, because this is sort of a recurring theme in the 90s, especially with id Software because of the violent video games that they make. And in the late 90s, we started to see a little bit of a moral panic over violent video games begin to take hold because of a very big event that some of our younger listeners may not have been around for, but most certainly everybody has heard of it. I'm talking about in 1999 when 2 teenagers, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, took guns and other weapons to their school in Littleton, Colorado, and killed 15 people, including themselves. That's kind of known as the Columbine High School Incident. That's a whole thing that you can... research yourself and learn all about, because it was a pretty big deal back in the day. But some clever folks online saw that those 2 kids had Doom logos on things that they were kind of able to see in their bags on TV, and they had books and games and other things that was like made it pretty clear that these guys maybe played some Doom, right? So the internet detectives soon found out that the pair had been very active in online Doom communities, which kind of understandably reignited the worries that parents had all over the country about the effect of violent video games on children. People were very worried that the boys had used Doom to practice their rampage or learn how to do it, or even just that the game itself gave them the violent urges to go and do what they did. So we'll start to see a lot of video game stuff popping back up in the Senate and that kind of things. So in the wake of this, there were a lot of changes that started to happen in schools. I remember some schools started implementing like metal detectors or mandating that all their bags be see-through, so it would be like harder to smuggle weapons or other contraband into the school. The book notes that a lot of schools banned trench coats, which I think is something that my middle school and high schools did around this time. Because I can't remember a time where it was okay to wear a trench coat at school in like middle school, high school. That's like 2001, 2008 for me.
I'm pretty sure they're still like banned. As far as
probably.
like I'm pretty sure they are.
Yeah, and it was so different. This time it was different from, because this wasn't the first school shooting to ever happen, but it was kind of one of the first to be sort of broadcast almost live and like really picked up a lot of media attention. And so it became like a really, really big deal. And so a lot of stuff changed after that. And so the investigation into violent video games was reopened by our boy Joe Lieberman, who would very shortly after this go on to make a run as Al Gore's vice president pick in the 2000 election. So since all of Eric Harris's Doom activity was easily found online, and because the boy, he was dead at this time, so they really only had that stuff to go off of to try to figure out his frame of mind and like why he might have done some of this. And of course, that didn't really look good. His levels were full of classic Doom stuff, blood and guts, people hanging from the ceilings, lakes of fire, kind of standard Doom stuff. Not shocking to anybody who played Doom games. Like this is how Doom levels kind of are. But to people outside of the community and people who don't play Doom, it's super shocking to see this kind of stuff and to think that like, wow, this person is like way, like this is really, really bad. And like, it's hard, and I can't blame them. Like, right, it looks pretty bad. So obviously gamers in the day were pretty quick to tell people that they were just games, that they didn't affect anybody. They didn't turn people into killers. In fact, the book talks about Gerard Jones and his book, Killing Monsters. The book is called Killing Monsters, Why Children Need Fantasy, Superheroes, and Make-Believe Violence. And here's a quote from that book that Masters of Doom quotes. So we got some quoteception going on here.
Quoteception.
Yeah. But I think this is a really good quote. So this is from Killing Monsters, Why Children Need Fantasy, Superheroes, and Make-Believe Violence. Exploring, in a safe and controlled context, what is impossible or dangerous or forbidden is a crucial tool in accepting the limits of reality. Playing with rage is a valuable way to reduce its power. Being evil and destructive in imagination is vital compensation for the wildness we all have to surrender to on our way to being good people. And so the book basically argues that like without these outlets, people would be much more violent than they are.
Oh, I was going to say, I just definitely agree with that. I think that's very true.
Yeah. I don't think we need to go too far into that because like I think it's pretty safe to say that if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not someone who needs to be convinced that Doom isn't what made these two go do what they did. But I do think that it's certainly possible. So while Doom doesn't cause this kind of things, I think the reverse, where people who do these kinds of things might be attracted to games like Doom, I think that is probably true. And that's not to say that Doom makes things worse or does anything, but I think the kind of person who would do something like that is probably also the kind of person who would enjoy Doom. Does that make sense? Like I don't mean to say that
I actually think
people
that's
who
a very
play
good
Doom are bad
observation.
people. Yeah, I don't think people who play Doom are inherently bad people. I just think,
But
one
I
is a
think
superset
bad
of the other.
people, if you could even say the term like, quote, bad people, would
Right.
be interested in Doom. Like, yeah,
Sure.
I definitely see where you're coming from with that. This gets into another philosophical thing.
Yeah. But politicians weren't going to give up that easy. And my cynical brain kind of thinks that politicians look for this stuff because the whole, like, think of the children is such a strong, like, emotional trigger for a lot of adults that they can use to get people to vote for them. So Sam Brownback, a Republican from Kansas, is all out here saying the video game Quake put out by id Software, the same company as the producer of Doom, consists of a lone gunman confronting a variety of monsters. For every kill, he gets points. As he advances in the game, the weapons he uses grow more and more powerful, and the more gory he trades in his shotgun for an automatic, and later gets to use a chainsaw on his enemies. The more skilled the player, the gorier the weapons he gets to use. Bloodshed is his reward, which I guess is technically true, but that paints it in a pretty bad light. Like that's not really the right way to paint that, I think, but I guess it's technically true. So this crusade against video games had bipartisan support because President Clinton is also out here ordering federal investigations too. So Joe Lieberman, President Clinton, you got Sam Brownback, everybody's out here trying to get us to think of the children, right? And it all culminates in Joe Lieberman and John McCain introducing a bill called the 21st Century Media Responsibility Act, which sought to create a formal rating system for games, movies, and music, and it would make it illegal for retailers to sell adult-rated media to children. That bill actually never went anywhere. It didn't even get voted on. So, but it was introduced.
We had the ESRB at this time too, didn't we?
Yeah.
So that is so protective of video games that it's hard to like compete with that, I think, which is good, you know?
Yeah. And I think, the ESRB was a good thing to come together to put things out to really help with this kind of stuff. And I think what this bill was trying to do was make a more unified rating system, because you've got the ESRB for video games, you've got the MPAA ratings for movies, and I think comics had like a comics authority code too that has its own rating system. And so this was kind of a way to unify those things, which I don't necessarily disagree with. And it would make it illegal for retailers to sell those things to children. And so like the idea of that doesn't necessarily bother me. I haven't read through the bill, so I don't know exactly what it stipulates, but because I think rating systems are good. I think those are especially useful for parents when it comes to selecting games for their children. A lot of parents don't play video games, and it's a lot to ask to say, well, play every single game that your kid is interested in to find out if it's good for them, right? Like I think ratings are a useful shortcut there. And as much as I hated it growing up, my parents used those rating systems to keep me from playing video games that maybe I shouldn't have been playing at the time. I still did, of course. Sorry, Mom and Dad, if you are listening. I definitely still played a lot of games that I wasn't supposed to growing up. And I think I turned out okay, but still,
I think you turned out the best.
Oh, thanks, Mike.
You're welcome.
But I don't disagree with the premise, and I don't necessarily disagree with forbidding retailers from selling games to kids outside their age range either. Like I said, I haven't read the bill, so I don't know the specifics of it. Just those ideas I'm not necessarily opposed to. So yeah, like I said, the bill never actually went anywhere. They didn't even vote on it. I think there are maybe some states that have it illegal. I know there are a lot of retailers that won't, like Walmart. I don't think will sell you an M-rated game if you're a kid. I don't think GameStop will. I don't know if it's actually illegal or not for them to do that, but I know there are lots of retailers that won't. In any case,
that like, I mean, it's still the same at like a movie theater. Like you can't go to an R-rated movie if you're like under 16, I think. Or something like that. Yeah,
and is that a legal thing, or is that just something theaters do?
I think that's a policy. I think it's just the theater that does it. Yeah, I think it really. I think it has to do with the company, which I think honestly, like, that's good on the company. But like you said, like this is on the parents now. Like that's what the best part about the ESRB is. It's like it took it away from like possibly censoring video games to putting it on the parents to be like, hey, video games can do what they want because it's like free speech in the company in the country. What's funny is earlier I meant to say company and I said country, and now I just want to say country and I said company. So this is fun. But I think that it's good that parents have to choose, what's good, because you don't want to censor, because video games are art. That's the premise of this podcast, I think, or one of the things we want to express that's important about them. So
I think rating systems for art is a good idea because not everything is suited to people of all ages. But we also shouldn't be putting limits on what kinds of art people can make.
Exactly.
And like, I think a parent should be able to take their kid to see an R-rated movie if they like that's a parent thing, right? But I don't necessarily think a movie theater should just let a 6-year-old in to see a Saw movie, right?
Definitely.
Not without their parents, at least.
Also, if you're a parent and you listen to this podcast, like, we would love to hear what you think. That's a good like conversation thing that I would be interested in knowing, because I don't have a child. My cat never plays video games. I asked her; she doesn't want to. So it'd be good to hear.
Yeah, and especially gamer parents who are in this world and know about games and like what their kids like. My parents don't play video games; they just use the rating to say like, well, this game is rated 17 plus, you can't play it because you're not 17. And like, I was like, oh man. But I would be interested to see people who play video games and can figure out those nuances of like, well, how do you decide what's okay for your kid to play? And is it okay for your 16-year-old to play Unreal Tournament, which is rated M for 17 and up, right? Like my parents were like, nope, you're not 17, you can't do it. But I think there is definitely, there's some wiggle room there, right? If you know what the game is. So I would definitely be interested to hear that.
I also think now they could play Unreal Tournament because they wouldn't think the graphics are good enough and the kid would quit, probably.
Yeah, that's true. yeah, I'll let my 6-year-old play Unreal Tournament, and he'll be like, "These graphics are way worse than Fortnite."
He's like, the rectangle turned red. Is that blood?
Yeah, and it was so realistic. Okay. But all this controversy also affected id too, because they started getting threats and protesters outside their building. In fact, they had to have the police get involved to help guard the place to keep protesters from hurting id employees, which is ironic considering what these people were protesting. But there were a lot of people that thought the events of Columbine were directly id's fault for having created Doom, and this wasn't the first time that id had been blamed for driving kids to violence. There had been a shooting in Kentucky a few years earlier too, and the murderer cited Doom and Quake as some of his favorite games. So, yeah, I think that's the example of like the reverse there of like, I think people who are interested in committing crimes like that may also be interested in playing games, but that doesn't mean that people who play games are all interested in committing crimes like that.
Definitely. And yeah, I mean, this is something I think recently, I want to say like a year ago when Mortal Kombat, not even a year ago, when Mortal Kombat came out with the new crazy fatalities they've made, I feel like I saw a news story again of this popping up. Like it hasn't gone away. It's kind of like a slow news day topic on cable news networks is video game violence. Because it's like, oh, you guys are really running out of things to talk about if you're covering video game violence in 2020.
Yeah, like didn't we figure this out like almost 30 years ago? Come on.
Yeah, come on. So.
What do you think? We're coming up on an hour here. So it's a pretty long podcast. We've still got a bit more in chapter 15, but we could call it here and pick up where we live off next week. I think this is a good break
this is
point.
A good stopping point. We kind of leave it on a scary cliffhanger of controversy in video games, which is good. So, Tyler, what you been playing?
This week I've been playing a little bit of Persona 4 still. I'm playing it like really piecemeal, but I have it set on easy, which is once I became okay with myself putting games on easy, like when we played through Gears of War and Halo and stuff, man, some games are so much less stressful now, especially a game like Persona where the penalties for dying are pretty stiff, at least in the earlier ones. Like put it on easy and then I won't die very much. And if I do, there's like a restart battle option. I'm like, yes, this is what I need. So I've been playing Persona 4 and that's really kind of been it. Yeah, I've been watching a lot of like catching up on TV and stuff, and this whole week we're in the U.S., so it's been all election coverage all the time, of course. So
there's small anxiety attacks throughout the week.
Yeah, super glued to that. That's kind of been what I've been doing this week. What about you? What have you been playing?
So I actually I was playing Mario 64 as part of the 3D collection, and I was like, you know what? I just want to skip to the game out of these three I haven't played yet, and I started playing Galaxy, and I love it.
Mario Galaxy is fantastic.
I just love this whole thing. I can only imagine what it would have been like to have the Wii and you get this Mario game that is so different than any other Mario game with like the gravity function and you're on these tiny planets and you're shooting in between. Like I'm not that far in the game. I've only gotten like 3 or 4 of the stars or whatever, but it's like super fun. I've had a little bit of game like I can't focus on one this week again. So I started playing Darkest Dungeon again, which is just... Why do I do this to myself? It's so brutal. Like I've team wiped like people I've spent a lot of time like leveling and just this week, and I'm like, come on. But I just love it. I love the fact that it's like you start questioning like, is this even a good idea? It's weird to have a game that's so addictive that you're questioning if you should play the game, but you still do it anyway. That's really good. Played that. Apex Legends came out with a new map that's really cool that I've been playing with my friends. It's got vehicles on it too. And they did something kind of cool with the vehicles where if you damage the vehicle, the 3 people on the vehicle split the damage.
Oh, interesting.
To make it, that's how they made it so vehicles like aren't super OP. Because I was thinking about like the minute you add vehicles into a first-person shooter like Halo or Battlefield, like I remember people that would play Battlefield only get into a tank or a plane and go like 40-0 in a game if they're really good at it, and then like what's even the point, you know? And I think that Apex doing that with the vehicles is kind of a clever little fix for that, you know. But those are the 3 games. I've also been catching up on TV this week as well. So that's all I had. Oh, we got a new review. Right. Forgot to mention that.
Oh, cool.
So if you want to review us, we would really appreciate it. It's always helpful, and it also makes us feel good if you do that. So you can also email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. And the new review, here it is. From Candlepin Kid, which is a great name. 5 stars. This right here. If you are a video game fanatic and you love history, this is the show for you. These guys make 50 to 70 minutes fly by. This is my favorite podcast to listen to. The information they provide is entertaining and never drags. Great memories flood back when listening to them about the history of video games. Please don't pass this up. The information, the discussions, and their opinions and stories will keep you entertained far beyond the show runtime. Thank you, Candlepin Kid. That's a very nice review.
That is a very nice thing to say. Thank you.
Yeah, and you can review us wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can just tell your friends. You know, that's helpful too, and it costs no money. And yeah, it's nice. It's just nice. And also, you can join our Discord if you want to. You can go to @mecoletta on Twitter, and I have the Discord pinned on my Twitter profile, or you can email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com, and you can just ask for the link, and I'll send it to you. That's how much I care for you to join the Discord. Discord's fun. We've had some really great discussions in Discord. I love it. People are plugging their own stuff on the Discord now, which is cool. Oh my goodness. I almost forgot the biggest news just now. You know the biggest news I'm talking about, Tyler?
Yes, definitely. I know exactly what you're about to say.
We are on YouTube now.
Yeah.
We have a YouTube channel. It's Codex History Podcast. Just put that into YouTube. We'll pop up. I have put so far 72 episodes up of the 120 something that we've done. I'm going to keep putting them up. I'm going to separate them into playlists. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, well, guess what? They're there. If you don't like to listen to it, well, good news. This feed is going nowhere. So it's going to be right here the whole time. And yeah, I just thought it's like something I could have done this whole time, and I didn't realize I could do it. So I'm like, yeah, let's just make a YouTube channel. And it's been kind of neat and fun. So they're up there if you like to listen to it there. Do you have anything else, Tyler? Any other announcements you want to talk about?
No, I think that about covers it.
All right. Do you want to say bye to everybody? Did I plug your Twitter? Your Twitter's at SneakerElf, ELPH.
Yeah. Tweet at me when you find PlayStation 5s for sale. I'm really trying to track one down.
Oh, are you trying to get one?
Yeah, I'm trying to track a PS5 down because I really want to play Spider-Man, and I know it's going to be on PS4, but I just really want to play it on PS5.
Well, do you think they would have new consoles come out like the day of? They're going to have them, right? In stores, they don't pre-order everything away, right?
Yeah, but I think they're going to be pretty tough to find.
You're not going to
I feel like there's never been
a way.
Yeah, I feel like I haven't had a hardware cycle where it was like, oh yeah, you can just walk in and grab one, ever, in my life.
Hey, you know, I mean, I guess you could walk in and grab one, but you got to get there really early and like fight people for it, I think.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to do that. But if you find, if Best Buy gets them in stock online, I can just grab one, or Amazon. That'd be the best, Amazon.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a little bit and see how I feel about the new year, about getting a new console. I'm leaning towards Xbox only because that's like what my buddies play on. But the idea of playing all these exclusives that I've never played, like the Uncharted series, God of War, Persona, like all this stuff that I've never played is really exciting to me. And I want to.
And you would have the full PS4 library, or most of it. Like almost every PS4 game works on PS5.
That's super cool. Yeah, he's saying now
you would have a pretty large back catalog. And the new Xbox is cool, and there's a lot of neat new features. There are 0 games that are only on it right now.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah, because everything else is on my old Xbox if I want to.
Yeah.
Plus PC. You can just play Xbox games on PC.
That's right.
It's pretty sweet.
Yeah. I may end up picking up a Series X at some point, but it's definitely way low on my priorities just because I got PC for all the good first-party Microsoft games coming out, and then for anything that I really, truly need an Xbox for, I do have an Xbox right now. So I guess we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, well, I hope you find a PS5, and let Tyler know if you find one.
Yeah.
That he needs one.
At me on Discord. Link me to those PS5s.
Yes, find the PS5. Well, with that, do you want to say goodbye to everybody?
Yeah, goodbye, everybody.